Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? That's been a little bit of a problem, but I have it right on me at this point. I join in the Commonwealth's thanks for your attention, for the time that you've put into this. I intend to present to you with highlights of many of the things that we went through, but I can assure you I'm not going to be going through the evidence that's already been moved in. And it took a long time, and you were very patient, and everyone was very patient.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was hearing. Move it.
Is that better, Your Honor?
Just a little further up.
Can everyone hear that? Okay. I'll try to speak a little louder. Ladies and gentlemen, I join in thanking you for your time, for your attention. You could see over the nearly 3 weeks that everybody was attentive, and that's something that is something that's crucial to this process, and so I thank you. When my children were younger, I used to walk out of the house and tell them, I'm going to defend the Constitution. They didn't have any idea what that was, and oftentimes that became, okay, whatever, Dad. I was a prosecutor then. I was a prosecutor in Fairfax County. And what that meant to me was you presented a case, no matter who it was, you presented a case where you looked at all possibilities and you looked at all evidence to determine and to make sure that you were pursuing someone that the evidence would support. In this case, this was quite unusual. When we first met for the initial opening, I talked to you about some things that I thought you should look into. I thought that you should have an ear towards what is it that they're going to present as evidence. And even I was surprised that the evidence that ultimately was presented by the Commonwealth was actually from my case. The only people that were called to testify from the Commonwealth's case in chief were for body cam video, police officers, a couple of those, and Detective Terry Leach. And he was the one who identified all of the scene photos. He identified many of the pieces of evidence that were brought in. And he was able to talk a little bit about things such as the blood stains on the gun, the blood stains next to the bed. And what he told you, ladies and gentlemen, and this was the extent of, I think, their testimony in their case, was that there are numerous things within this scene that we can see in pictures, but they were never tested. There are numerous things that became the centerpiece of the fantastic story that the Commonwealth tells, yet they were never tested. For example, if I were to have the opportunity to cross-examine, say, the chief detective of this case, I might ask, why wasn't there fingerprints done, or even DNA, of this gun safe that we hear about? We hear Juliana goes into the back bathroom and talks about getting a gun. It changes a little bit over time, but if someone had said they went to the gun safe, because we're talking about guns, we're talking about shooting, why wouldn't there be some sort of evidence to either corroborate or preclude that possibility? I asked Detective Leach, he says, well, it's really up to the forensic examiners. They make the decision. In looking at the scene, you'll notice in the body cam video that you're going to be reviewing, there's a point when first responders come in and you see Brendan kneeling down next to his wife, rendering aid. He just shot Joe Ryan. He testified yesterday, he puts the gun down to his right, which is where his holster is. And he also indicates to you in his testimony yesterday that he moves the knife away from Joe Ryan. The staining on the bed where my client put the gun for the first responders, because whenever there's any sort of a shooting, you have to make sure that you are nowhere near the gun in the event that you're perceived as someone who's hostile. He puts it to the corner of the bed, and the questions that remain were, did anybody ever test the blood on that gun? And you hear from Detective Leach, you can't do that. It was already test fired, and that would be potential for contaminant. Now, we didn't test the stains down on the floor where the gun was lying in before it went up on the bed. And we didn't test the gun, which appeared to be something that a serologist could just take a swab of. Yet there's some significance placed on the fact that there was a blood stain where the gun was when it had been sitting in a puddle. And so that actually was tested. In terms of the blood stain pattern analysis, which appears to be the Commonwealth's main focus of the case now, there are questions about many of the things that Ms. Sands says were never tested. And so the conclusions that are being reached in terms of Brendan Banfield did this, he did this, he did this, based upon whatever blood analysis, is oftentimes not considering the fact that it was never tested. We don't even know whose blood it was. Those kind of things are important. And so let's go back to defending the Constitution. When you are charged with presenting a case, and I chuckle a little bit when Ms. Sands says, we haven't proved anything, we haven't shown any evidence. All we've done is show evidence. All we've done is try to get the truth out there. My client doesn't have to testify, yet he gets up there and he tells a story. He's a philanderer. We can conclude that. It's horrible. It's a horrible situation to be in. He had affairs. He accepted that. He told you, ladies and gentlemen, exactly what was going on and exactly how it went. On cross-examination, he admitted to communications that were provided, which were letters between he and Juliana when she was in jail. This is about the truth. In the beginning, you heard our duty is about fairness, our duty is about being just, all those sorts of things. Yet you don't put on any of your detectives. She's referring to the expert that they have that I called. I called 3 times, and you saw his demeanor. He was very uncomfortable. Why would he be uncomfortable? Why would he have been uncomfortable talking about his work? And we dug for it, and he ultimately said, the executive summary and the data remained the same. The only thing that changed is Juliana Perez-Magalay's statement. Excuse me 1 second. So there, number one, that's the first time that anyone in this case, which was when I called him, conclusively said the entire catfishing theory changed upon her plea deal. So let's talk a little bit about confirmation bias, or I think we referred to it when we were talking in closing, or when I was talking in closing, about a rush to judgment. You've heard from detectives from Fairfax County. Detective Smith came up and she told you the catfish theory started within weeks of the event. She says, that's not how we do it. We look to the evidence and we follow the evidence. Seems like a pretty reasonable way to go. And that was something that I asked of pretty much everyone that was in some sort of investigatory capacity. That is the way cases go, is the evidence leads you where you're going to go. But lo and behold, what we find out is that that theory is being peddled by the two people in command staff, actually the three people in command staff that you also heard from. You heard from from Mr. Bruch, formerly Deputy Chief Bruch, that when Brendan Miller presented his findings, well, first of all, he said, I didn't agree with his report. And I said, well, what, if any, analysis of the raw data did you do in order to make that statement, I don't agree with this report? He said, well, it wasn't that. I don't know about the data, though he said he was a computer forensic PhD. He didn't take the time to do that. So I said, okay, well, did you ever have Detective Miller come in and walk you through it? Like, show your work? Well, we talked about it quite often, but did you, in fact, have him go through everything that he did to arrive at his work? No, we didn't do that. He speaks to Lieutenant Giacchio at the time, who appears to have a direct line to him, obviating anybody else within the command staff. And what you'll see, and you'll see it in the evidence, there are emails where soon after Juliana Perez Magalhaes changes her story, there are emails to Sergeant Ames. And you remember Sergeant Ames, he came to the stand based upon my subpoena and my calling him. And Sergeant Ames was not comfortable. And you could see any of these police witnesses are just not comfortable coming to the stand on my subpoenas and answering my questions. But he did answer them. And what you saw were emails. Those emails were essentially they were just kind of forwarding it up the chain so that his supervisors knew. And he was very candid about it. I was new. I wasn't sure how to deal with a situation like this. I'd never dealt with a situation like this. But what the situation was Detective Miller's executive summary being sent up the chain to Sergeant Ames, who was in a different division than Lieutenant Giacchio, saying there's different ways, there are three different emails that you'll see. Brendan Miller has got to look over this, and he's got to go line by line and explain how we got it wrong, things such as that. The final one is to Sergeant Ames. I can tell you that every single conclusion in his report was wrong. He's going to have to do something in order to, and it's kind of, essentially, he's going to have to change this report because it needs to conform with the proffer of Juliana Perez Magalhaes. So that's twice now. Two different people that I called to the stand. that essentially confirms that everything changes when she comes in and testifies. Let's get back to confirmation bias, rush to judgment. When you have people in a supervisory nature, you have a command staff chain of command, and the highest people are pushing you on your work product, that's why you look like the people that are up here testifying, because they're sitting on the fence. They're sitting on a razor, and neither side is good for them. But they came before us and they testified, and they testified as to the truth. Detective Miller spoke the truth, and you could see it. Detective Miller, his work was concurred by Mr. Litsky, who you heard for quite often during this period of time. And it was peer reviewed, and it was concurred by someone, a third party. You heard Detective Miller say, that's never been done in Fairfax County. You heard him say, I didn't ask for that peer review. He didn't know who asked for that peer review. Why would you want a peer review of something if it wasn't for it to change? So once again, not happy with that, not happy with the work product. There's nothing to indicate in Detective Miller's background anything but stellar expertise. But he wasn't introduced as an expert for the Commonwealth. Now, this is where this whole theory went wrong. They discredited him, they disregarded him, and they didn't listen to him. And that's a problem. That's a problem for their case. Because there are things in digital forensics that had he been involved with the group that was talking to Juliana Perez Magalhaes, he would have been able to guide them in terms of this is where the digital forensics is in conflict with you. And you heard me testify, or I'm sorry, you heard me ask questions of many of these detectives who might have been involved. Did anybody ever challenge her? Were you present when she recanted for the first time? Well, we couldn't ask that of anyone because the detectives that were in the room have not been called. The detectives that were in the room, I didn't call. And so we don't know anything, but we heard Detective Miller, and he had viewed it, and he said, when I asked him, were there challenges to what was said? He said, no, it was pretty free-flowing. To me, that tells you that whatever the story you're telling us is great, because we're getting bread in Banfield based upon that. Once again, confirmation bias. The first few weeks after the death of Christine Banfield becomes this theory of catfishing, which is what Juliana Perez Magalhaes provides to this. Now let's talk a little bit about digital forensics. And I'm not going to try to use the computer to show these to you because that was excruciating at times. But I think we've gone through it with significant enough detail that when you go back to look at the exhibits, and I'll tell you which exhibits if you wish to write them down, you're going to be able to see exactly what Mr. Litsky was saying. It's complicated. It's been complicated for me since the beginning, but it's not necessarily an easy grasp. But I would ask that you take the opportunity. You're going to have all this evidence to review this particular area. So some of you may have been asking about January, or may wonder about January 9th. That's a significant date in this investigation, because that's the day when the Gmail account, called the suspect Gmail account, was started. Let's just look at how Juliana Perez Magalhaes managed this. Regarding the Gmail setup on January 9, 2023, Juliana told the Commonwealth that she was at the house with Brendan when she witnessed him create the Gmail account that was used to kick off the entire catfishing scheme. The Commonwealth took her at her word. The police didn't make any effort to corroborate her story. The one detective who stood up and said the evidence contradicted her story was transferred off the case. I think the words were from then Deputy Chief Bruce, "That guy will never work on another digital forensics case in major crimes as long as I'm here." He admitted it. There was no dancing around. He admitted it. So you have something that's in opposition to whatever the theory is that you're trying to peddle, and you're in the command staff, you're high up in the police department, you can just transfer them. And so it was from that point on, Detective Miller was of no benefit to the police, because no one would utilize him once the stamp of disapproval had hit him. He was moved over to child sex. Juliana told the same story to you here in court, and it's a lie. The account wasn't created with Christine's phone. I'm sorry, the account was created with Christine's phone, not her laptop, which was the story that Juliana had told. Juliana wasn't even home. She hadn't witnessed anything. And you saw the presentation, and that would be, the evidence would be Exhibit 297, Exhibit 294, and Exhibit 295. They're all in relation. You'd be looking at the Google records, the T-Mobile records, and the subsequent map of where the location was. You heard from Mr. Litsky that the Gmail account is crucial. They all interact. The Gmail account is necessary to get the messages relating to the FetLife, and then the Telegram was created as part of this, whatever we want to call it at this point. Juliana made it up. She told the Commonwealth what they wanted to hear, and without question, they just took it as their story. She told this lie to secure herself a deal that benefited her. This one event relating to digital forensics is reasonable doubt, because every other event going forward requires Brendan, based upon her statement that she didn't have anything to do it, she didn't know how to do the Gmail account, she didn't know anything about the setup, requires Brendan to be involved, or Christine. So let's look at this. There was a period of time, and you heard evidence of it, Brendan wasn't at home. January 23rd, there was a Gmail login at 11:22. That's Defense Exhibit 245. FetLife was accessed. In the communications, you heard Mr. Litsky opine as an expert that catfishing is not a scheme where one talks about their husband or talks about how's your experience on this site. The catfishing in the truest form of the government's theory is we just want to get someone on the hook, and then person's gonna come, and then we're gonna do what we did in there in the house. It's not consistent with catfishing. And you'll see, based upon the records relating to January 23rd, there was only one adult in the home at that time. And that adult was Christine Banfield. January 30th, there are 2 Gmail logins. 10:36 and 11:03. Exhibits Brendan Banfield 251 and Brendan Banfield 252. Brendan wasn't home. That can be shown. So there are 2 adults in the house. Christine Banfield and Juliana Perez Magalhaes. Juliana testified to all of you. She doesn't know anything about the Gmail. She doesn't know how to activate it. Well, somebody activated it that day. Somebody logged in twice. And there are 2 adults in the house. Either Juliana's lying again, and she did figure out how to do Gmail, or this was Christine Banfield. Digital forensics, oftentimes, for people who don't understand it, will say things like, well, isn't it possible this? Well, you see what happens when an investigator is looking into, trying to get attribution. They're looking at all sorts of different data facts in order to make a determination, make an opinion. It's not as easy as saying, well, isn't it possible this? There's more to it. And once again, digital forensics is not being given the strength that it is due. February 7th, 2023, Gmail login at 10:02 p.m. There's only 2 adults in the house. Brendan Banfield can be identified as being out of the house, and one of whom says she never did anything with Gmail. That's BB 257. It's been presented to you. You can recollect what it was that was said, but what we know is that Brendan was out of the house. What we know is that Juliana was there, and we know that Christine was there. February 13th, 2023. There are logins in the morning in the 7 a.m. hour. Well, what we know from digital forensics is that Brendan left at 6:05. And at 6:12, he was at Tyson's Corner, based upon his E-ZPass records. At 6:17, he was already to Alexandria. And soon thereafter, he was in Cheltenham, which is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They call it FLETC. Well, while he's on the road, while he's at the FLETC Training Center doing his training, there are 2 logins. And there are 2 possible adults there. Juliana Perez Magalhaes, who has said she doesn't know how to do that, and Christine Banfield. 217, you'll see Gmail logins at 11:19, 11:23, Exhibit 262, 263, same thing. 2 possible adults. Brendan Banfield was out of the house. One said she never did anything with Gmail. A fact that I think is very important in the discovery that was provided both to Juliana Perez Magalhaes as well as my client in preparation for her trial. FetLife was in the discovery, but Gmail was never in focus. Never in focus. So her testimony, there's a comfort level with FetLife because she saw it in discovery. She didn't see the Gmail. And isn't that a coincidence that when asked any details, she says, I don't know. When she says, I don't know, for 5 or 6 questions, I hope you recall it, I recall it vividly. She said, if you keep asking these questions, I'm just going to say, I don't know. And she continued to do that. Were my questions challenging, like the kind of questions that a detective might do? No. We were just looking for details. We were looking for details because we wanted to try to iron out what are these situations here. She was unwilling. She didn't know, but she knew I was digging for something. But if you look at the way she testified to all of you in direct, she was led to a certain statement or a certain fact, and she stated it. In cross-examination, I asked anything about that. Do you know who was in the house? Do you know where you were? Were you on the phone on WhatsApp with Christine prior to that? Where were you located at the time that this call took place? I don't know. I don't know. If that's what it says, I don't know. You know, there were a series of similar answers. Once again, her role has grown in importance for this case. It's, along with Deputy Chief Bruce and Lieutenant Giacchio, she's pushing it on through her deal. Now, one of the things that I talked to you all about, and one of the lengthy cross-examinations was relating to a group of exhibits which were number 1 through number 69. And you'll see it. It was highlighted. I think you've seen it for a brief period of time, but we were moving along. Look at that. You'll see these are the personal letters that she would write to my client. And those personal letters, I believe, is the closest to the truth that you will have heard from Juliana Perez Magalhaes. She was in a situation which really was affecting her. And it would affect anyone. And she was telling you how she was feeling. She was telling you what she thought. There were things that were relevant to this case. They're trying to make me turn on you. I'm not going to do it. I don't have anything to say. There's nothing that I can do to help them with. And then you'd see letters as the time went on. I don't know if I can live like this anymore. I think it's better for me to end. And then as she gets closer to a preliminary hearing in April of 2024, you start to see real angst and real worry. And they're coming to her and asking her if she'll testify against my client, because that's what they wanted from the beginning. She was a pawn in trying to get to my client. You'll see this timeline in these letters. It goes toward July. July was the date of her first trial. And you'll see, and I'm not suggesting what she's saying about her lawyer is correct, but it was obviously something that was on her mind, and she didn't feel like she had the support. At that point, if you think about it, the only support that she was having was from Brendan. Brendan was not arrested. Brendan was there communicating with her. Brendan's mom was actually supporting her lifestyle in the jail in terms of commissary, things like that, and also supporting her by having paid for a lawyer. Around August, you'll see in these letters, it gets to be real despair. And then you can almost see hope just drop right away from her when she hears that Brendan's arrested. And then she testified. She went into the hospital from October 13th to October 23rd. And as soon as she's released and back to the jail, the deal is done. She's told, if you testify against him, we'll recommend time served disposition. She can go back to Brazil, be with her mom, create her new life. And we know a little bit about the new life that she's planning on creating. And you have it in the documents that are before you. She's been negotiating with people who are connected to Netflix. She's been negotiating with people who are connected to Hulu. She's been talking to every other news media, at first to try to see if they just put $50 into her commissary. But then she realized, hey, there may be something here. She's invented, she's going to try to write letters. She's going to try to write a book. She wants to have a documentary. She wants to have a series. And she's about to sign or about to agree when her lawyer steps in and says, don't sign that. And so around March of 2025, you see negotiations essentially end. The number was in the area of $25,000, and it was going to be sent to her mother in Brazil. It's a lot of money in Brazil. And so, where's the downside for her? Where's the downside for her? I mean, there are plenty of people who would make that decision, given the circumstances, given you're 2 weeks from the trial, when your attorney asks for a continuance. And oddly enough, he was asking to find a digital forensic examiner. If they'd done that, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe they would have realized how strong the digital forensics examinations are. Her entire story has been bought and paid for. First, with her freedom, and then now a little bit on the back end. There's a jury instruction here that says something about corroborated, uncorroborated testimony, and you should be careful of it. Now, how did they try to corroborate her? So isn't this funny? They're trying to bolster the witness who's the centerpiece of their entire case. Well, They found something when my client was arrested on his laptop that said they'd just gotten vinyl light windows in December. So, sitting in the meeting with whomever, they say, can you tell us anything about these vinyl light windows? They're triple paned, probably really good. I wasn't there, I don't know. But the story she gave was that, I mean, fantastic. We got the triple pane windows because Brendan wanted to make sure you couldn't hear a gunshot in the bedroom. And and she says, he asked me to go outside and scream to see if the windows, and she says, I'm not going to do that. So she ended up staying inside and saying Brendan went out and screamed. Well, you heard the test. I mean, this gentleman from Vinyl Light Windows came in. They trotted him up there, and he said, "Yeah, you know, we met in January. That was when we first talked about this, and it wasn't just the windows for the bedroom, which is what Juliana said. It was the full windows, and then you saw an artifact on Facebook that is Christine Banfield actually talking to her neighbors about the numerous vendors that they had been working with to try to get a quote from December 2021. So this is well before Juliana came on the scene, but it's an opportunity to try to make her appear in the know, to corroborate her. Well, that was a disaster, and that didn't work. And you heard the gentleman, you know, what the life cycle of order to quotes to all those things, they were all done well before any sort of relationship started with Brendan. Confirmation bias. Rush to judgment. It continues on. Detective Leah Smith tells us the catfish theory was told to them within 2 weeks. She goes on to talk about the theory and investigation and the direction it was going in. During a period of time soon thereafter, Detective Miller tells of his transfer against his will because he was advised he'd never work on major crimes cases again. Sergeant Ames, after receiving communications from Lieutenant Giacchio, immediately sends it up the chain. Could be just the way he does things, or it could be, read those emails. Hey, I'm being asked to do this. I need some support here. When you have a theory that gets pushed from non-investigative command staff, and you have a theory that the investigators look at, then you create something called tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision, if you're following what essentially are orders, is to the exclusion of any other evidence, any other theory, such as maybe this is a rekindling of previous fantasies, and the guy who brought the knife to the house is the stabber. You can see how that theory is going to be pushed aside. And you can see how that's not very noteworthy for purposes of media or other attention. Once again, rush to judgment. Catfishing. If you're catfishing, meaning you were trying to get the one guy, Joe Ryan, to come to the house so that you can do this gruesome act. Why are you saying anything about, I can't have marks on my face or my body? If you're catfishing, why would that matter? It doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent. However, if you're interested in dabbling in this lifestyle or getting back into it, however you want to say, then that makes perfect sense. There's 9 different conversations on FetLife with different people. And you have all of the FetLife communications. And you can see, why would you have discussions where you're bringing things like no marks, anything like that? All you need is one if you're going to carry out what the government's theory is. Why would you give anyone details about your work or your home or your husband if you were catfishing? I mean, if it's truly catfishing, you're looking for the biggest pile of people that might be considered. If you're telling someone that you have a husband and you want them to come over to the house, why would anybody come? You're losing the potential people that you might want to have there who are violent or, love to do all the things that Juliana has said. Why would you do that if you're catfishing? It doesn't make sense. On February 13th, 2023, why would there be generic research on secure apps for communications? In fact, why was there even a need to transition to Telegram? Because if you're on FetLife, it's clear there are FetLife communications. And so in the world of catfishing, if you think about it, you want to do as few things that can get you caught. So what was the leap to Telegram? It doesn't make any sense. In fact, this whole theory doesn't make any sense. And the only way the government can make any sense of it is if Juliana Perez Magalhaes adopts their story once again. As late as February 19th, which would be 5 days before Christine Banfield's death. Under the government's theory, there were dates that were being explored with 5 different FetLife users. Why? If Joe's already coming, why? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Juliana Perez Magalhaes is doing what probably anyone would do who's from another country, who comes here for an adventure, which is what au pair exchange is. It's essentially a cultural exchange. And the idea is you get to live in the country and you get to live like people in the United States. And then you go back at the end of your time. She knew at the point when she was hospitalized to the point of sickness as a result of what was going on in her life that she had to do something. And the Commonwealth and the police broke her. She turned down a misdemeanor, according to her, in January, on January 1st, and you'll see it in the communications. She turned down a misdemeanor, and all she had to do was testify against Brendan. In July, you hear her recounting her meeting with her lawyer, where her lawyer floats the idea, what about a manslaughter, time served, and you don't have to testify against Brendan. She agreed to that. That was never what they were talking about. That was never what they wanted to do. You heard from Sergeant Matt Nilsson, who briefly came in, and he was one of the homicide people during the time of the killing of Christine Banfield. He's since rotated out to another division. But he came in and he said the whole goal of arresting Juliana was to flip her against Brendan. Once again, further corroboration. We knew it, we saw it from her letters, and now you have someone who was involved saying, yeah, that was what we wanted to do. That's why we did it. They broke her. In talking about the blood work and the blood testimony, it was suggested by the Commonwealth that we hadn't proven anything. The Commonwealth had not shown anything. Well, I beg to differ. You heard from Leanne Singley. Leanne Singley is an expert. She's an expert with tremendous credentials, and she's an expert in truth in terms of what she's allowed to say, what she can say, what she can't say. And she speaks to you in the language of bloodstain pattern analysis. She's not talking about possibilities, she's talking about facts. She's a scientist. Her counterpart from the Commonwealth was willing to entertain any possibilities. In fact, questioning of her was, well, isn't it possible this? Isn't it possible this? Isn't it possible this? And oftentimes you would hear her respond, well, that wouldn't be something that I would have expected to see, which is a very interesting statement if you think about it. What is it that she's expecting to see? Which makes you wonder, who's telling her what she should be seeing? And does it fit the narrative? So let's go to Leanne Singley. She tells you of the account of the events. Ryan stabbed Christine in the neck. Brendan shot Ryan in self-defense. Brendan rendering aid to Christine. Ryan moved toward Brendan and grabbed Brendan's arm. You see that in the videos. And Juliana shot Ryan to end the threat. What Leanne Singley tells you is all of the blood evidence supports this. Ryan brought the knife. That'll be Commonwealth's Exhibit 10. The knife has blood on it with Christine's DNA on the blade and Ryan's DNA on the handle. Ryan has Christine's blood on his hand as well as a puncture wound, which the medical examiner says is consistent with the knife. And if you look at the knife, it's described in the certificates of analysis as testing underneath the handle by the edge of the blade. And if you look at the marks on Joseph Ryan's hand, the medical examiner states that these wounds are consistent with that knife. Which reminds me, the medical examiner also said that Joe Ryan was capable of movement. And you can recall your own notes on that. That was very clear, which is in absolute conflict with Ms. Groff and is in absolute conflict with the Commonwealth's theory. She further goes on to say, Ryan has Christine's, I'm sorry, the blood on his hand shows his hand was closed when the blood was deposited. That's that closed fingers we were talking about. That's what the Commonwealth was talking about in terms of having nothing going in between the fingers. That's holding a knife. That's how that happens, because you're holding it very rigid in order to do that. The bloody handprint on Ryan's thigh is consistent with him touching his own leg with his bloody hands. That's Ms. Groff. The stains on Brendan's jeans and shirt are what you expect he would get while giving aid to Christine. And we see it. We see it on the body-worn camera. We see it on the still shots. He's leaning down. He's down there on his knees. Interestingly, Ms. Groff says, all I saw was his hands around Christine's neck. I don't know that that's not accurate, but that's probably not what was really going on there, because everyone else said he was rendering aid. The police witnesses, who are more objective than the expert witness for the Commonwealth, all say that he was rendering aid. Testimony by Ms. Groff and the ME indicated that Ryan could move after the gunshot. And what's most important is that there's a DNA mixture of Christine and Ryan on the arm of the jacket where Brendan said he was grabbed. 3 times. 3 times when he was being told by the first responders, go into the bathroom. He said, they're asking, is he okay? He hit me on the right side under the shoulder blade by the arm. He said that. Then in the ambulance, you'll hear that. He says, when they're asking, are you okay? Are you okay? I don't think I'm injured, but he did hit me on the backside of my jacket. In the ambulance, they grabbed the jacket. And then when he was in the hospital, the doctor asks, and he says, he hit me on the back, but I'm not injured. The critical part of that is that the DNA mixture of Christine's blood and Joe Ryan's blood on the jacket was, if you were listening to my client yesterday, he tells you that that was Joe Ryan after he shot him. That mixture of blood with Christine and Joe Ryan himself had to be after Joe Ryan had stabbed Christine in the neck. And that's the way her blood would get on him in order to be able to get the back of my client's jacket. That's what Ms. Singley says. And that's why the Commonwealth is so intent on saying this had to have been on the floor, this had to have been on the bed. But there's no evidence to support that. There's a story to support it, but there's no evidence to support that. The evidence in terms of what happened in that room, and the crucial evidence is spot A on the back of the jacket, and you have it in evidence, and you also have it under Commonwealth's Exhibit 160, 161, and 167. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the prosecution's evidence. Brendan's DNA is not on the knife. That's also supported by those same forensics reports. He doesn't have any injuries to his hands. That was confirmed by EMTs In fact, poor officer, I'm sorry, the young man who was 1 year on, I forget his name now, he was brought up to introduce his video and then was asked, well, why'd you let him wash his hands? And you can see my client, for a period of probably 40 minutes, is literally walking around, you know, in a trance from what he was just involved with, and he was walking around with blood all over his hands. And it was only after he was told that his wife had died, and the emotions that come from that, where he was blowing his nose and wiping his eyes and doing all those things, it was offered for him to wash his hands. But that appears to be some sort of a horrible thing that this officer allowed him to do, and it was even an insinuation that my client was trying to cover something up. This was 45 minutes later. It wasn't as though he went into the bathroom and did it right there after being removed from rendering aid. Brennan's DNA does not show up anywhere on Joe Ryan, which is consistent with what he told you, which is that he never touched Joe Ryan. There's no indication that there was any sort of movement, and frankly, what's the possibility, I guess I'll use the same word, that a 185-pound man would have been moved if he was otherwise dead? It's not an easy task. And Brendan Banfield's a athletic guy, but I don't think he's up to moving 200 pounds in that sort of way. So that's an absolute red herring in this. When
Mr. Carroll, do you have quite a bit more? I just want to give him a chance to take a break.
probably about another half hour.
Yes, let's go ahead and take our morning recess for 15 minutes. Please do not discuss the case at this time and do not do any outside research.
Been watching the closing arguments in the Fairfax County courtroom, of course, the double murder trial of Brendan Banfield. First of all,
do you think we should maybe go back in for a moment? It does look like the judge might be saying something.
Maybe something about the time.
Okay, actually, never mind. She is getting up. So, you know, we've been hearing her say a few things as they're coming out of the breaks and going into the break. So it does look like they're on their break.
So this should be about a 15-minute break. We see your comments. We see all of it on our YouTube channel, so keep those comments coming. A lot of you have interesting thoughts about what's happened so far. Let's see here. First, we had Jenna Sands, the prosecutor, do the closing argument on behalf of the state. That took about 30 minutes.
Not even, really.
Not even, and she got straight to the point, really laying out the case. And just to remind everybody what Brendan Banfield is facing: 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of using a firearm to commit a felony, and 1 count of child endangerment.
Yeah.
And so,
should we go through those charges a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
And explain?
Let's do
so
that.
At the beginning of court today, we did hear the judge explain each of these charges to the jury and what they need to keep in mind. So with the first one that Annie mentioned, the aggravated murder within 3 years, with that one, they have to decide whether or not he killed Brendan Banfield, killed both Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. He has to be found guilty of killing both of them or not killing either of them. And it also has that premeditated attachment. It has to be that it was willful, deliberate, and premeditated and happened within 3 years. The next charge that you mentioned, the aggravated murder, same act or transaction, same concept, that he killed both Christine and Joseph, that it was willful, deliberate, and premeditated. And then there's that firearm charge. That just is that he attempted to commit murder while in commission of a firearm. And then the child abuse charge, which is that other one that we've been talking about. It's that Brendan had custody and that he willfully or negligently put that child's life in danger.
yes. We ended with John Carroll, the defense. he is not done yet with his
No.
closing argument. They
30
broke
more minutes.
30 more minutes, he said. I will say he was about an hour in. We were listening to him for an hour. He said about 30 more minutes. And a reminder that, you know, the defense's job is not to explain what really happened. His main priority is to raise a reasonable doubt in
Poke holes in the theory that the Commonwealth has provided.
Right, dismantle this you know, this story that the prosecutors are accusing Brendan of. So he's really kind of taking us. I felt like he started off with, you know, the evidence piece, saying that there were numerous things within the scene that were never tested, but we saw it. So he kind of relied on that forensic piece. Why weren't fingerprints done with the gun safe? We you know, heard that Juliana had gone back to grab the gun from Brendan's gun safe. Did anyone test the blood on the gun? The stains weren't tested. So he's really trying to raise those questions.
Yeah, and he is trying to say that, you know, he's alluding to the fact that he believes the police involved in this case did not do that job.
He also,
he made mention that none of the homicide detectives came up to the stand were called by the prosecution, and that was something he brought up in his opening statements as well, that you're not going to hear from the prosecution them call any of those homicide detectives, because those original homicide detectives didn't necessarily fall in line with the prosecution's theory and case here.
Right, so we'll see what he has to say after we come back from this break. Jenna opened up the closing arguments, you know, thanking the jury members for being there. Of course, we also experienced within the last week this snowstorm, so folks had to make adjustments to their family life and digging out of the snow and everything. So she did start with that sentiment and then got right into it. I mean, rapid fire.
Which is what we've seen from her through
We
this
have
whole
seen
process.
that. That seems to be her style, just getting straight to the point and backing it up with support and facts and really emphasizing, you know, she said, you've heard from experts, detectives, Brendan's unreliability, the plethora of evidence that we've presented, and basically accusing Brendan of being the mastermind behind this elaborate plan to kill his wife, Christine, and Joseph Ryan, so that he and this au pair, the nanny that lived with them, could just run off and be in love, even went as far as, you know, talking about the letters of, you know, professing his love, and they were coming up with baby names, or he did, right? So she's really trying to lay that case down.
Yeah, and where we heard John Carroll saying, Brendan Banfield laid it all out for you. He was honest about his affairs. He told you the truth. He aired out his dirty laundry. She's saying, well, he kind of lied also. He said the relationship wasn't serious, but then he's saying, I love you to her.
Along those lines, something very important is that Jenna pointed out there is no evidence of Christine having an affair or talking to other men, and no messages of this, no FetLife trail of Christine, you know, wanting to have this type of sex fantasy, right, previously. And she also had a blood clot disorder. She lived with this, and this was known by Brendan. He admitted, you know, he said, I knew about it. So she's raising that question of why would someone who is living with a blood clot disorder want to engage in rough sex?
And specifically the knife play activity.
And the knife play activity.
Which is what was brought up. And I thought also, going back to the affairs, you know, Brendan testified that he had multiple affairs, that that Christine knew about some of them. But he also said Christine had multiple affairs. And I thought it was interesting today when Jenna Sands, the prosecutor, she said, that affair was 10 years ago that you're saying happened, but where's your proof? You could have called that person to the stand, or you could have called these people that you're claiming Christine had these conversations with.
There is no evidence.
Right. They didn't provide any evidence there. Another big thing that really stood out for me is that conversation. You know, we heard the jury get the instructions from Judge Penny Oscarati about what they are to consider when making their decision. And towards the end there, we heard Jenna Sands say Brendan and Juliana worked together. So just because, and specifically the portion about Joseph Ryan, because we know both Brendan and Juliana shot Joseph Ryan, she was saying, you know, Brendan fired the first shot to Joseph Ryan's head. Juliana fired the second shot, and the medical examiner, or one of the witnesses called, said that that first shot by Brendan was rapidly fatal. So she made a point to say that Brendan and Juliana were working together. And if you believe they were working together, that means you can say Brendan killed Joseph Ryan, even though it may be unclear whose shot was the fatal shot.
Right. So that was another key point. The physical evidence. So they presented, the prosecutor presented a lot of physical evidence, and that was her point. We presented to you that Christine died of 7 stab wounds to her neck. She suffered massive blood loss. The knife that Brendan used to kill her had a 4-inch blade. This is the knife that Joseph Ryan brought to the home, thinking that he would be involved with the sex fantasy.
He was instructed to in those telegram messages that we saw from FetLife.
Right. And she also mentioned the semen stains on Juliana's bed sheets as far as this love affair. It is clear a love affair took place. We saw the semen stains on Juliana's bed sheets. The clothes had been moved to the primary bedroom after the murders occurred. Also the photos of them. We saw that photo before and after, right?
Of the bedroom, right.
In the bedroom, when she moved into the primary bedroom.
Yeah, and to be clear about the semen stains, we're talking about Juliana's bedroom for that. There were no semen stains found from Joseph Ryan in the bedroom with Christine. So we're talking about 2 different sets of people here, right? Like Juliana and Brendan they've never denied that relationship. The question, of course, being, were Joseph and Christine having a relationship? And that doesn't seem to be a thing that either side has really said. They're just saying Christine invited Joseph Ryan, but it's not clear that is actually, there's any proof to that from what we've seen.
Yeah. Also, what stood out to me was her bringing up the 911 call, how Christine's phone had been turned off that morning. It was hidden in the kitchen. And I don't know, I mean, maybe some people do, but she raised the point, who does that? Who turns off their phone and just tosses it into the kitchen drawer?
Yeah, and an important note here, when one of the officers testified and showed the crime scene photos, we saw the photos of where they found Christine's laptop and her phone. It was downstairs in the kitchen. But when Brendan testified, he said that when he left for work the morning of February 24th, 2023, he said Christine was awake, she was in her bed, and she had both her laptop and her cell phone.
Right.
So that kind of contradicts his story about it, right?
Yeah, right. The 911 coming in, the first one I believe was at 7:47. That was a hang up, but in the background you could hear Joe Ryan moaning.
And what's interesting there is Juliana testified it was Joseph Ryan's voice moaning. That's what the prosecution has said. But then yesterday, the defense called up this witness who compared the audio of the Banfield's dog, which the dog's name is Lily, and the noise Lily, which I believe she's a husky, makes when she's whining or growling, that moaning sound. And he said he compared the 2 audio clips and found they were similar. But then the prosecution got back up there and said, but you're not clear that those clips aren't humans. You're just saying they're the same. You don't know if they're humans. You can't really prove anything here. So kind of put a stop to that testimony.
Yeah. What else stood out to you, Katie?
I mean, so many things, right? I know we talked about how Jenna Sands moved so quickly. We saw that in opening. We saw both of them move rather quickly, but through the process of this trial, we've seen Jenna continue to move quick, to the point, very focused on getting things done. And then John Carroll seems to really slow down and take his time here. He introduced more than 300 pieces of evidence, and we saw him go through each piece of evidence clearly. And he even said to the jurors today, it may have been excruciating at points, but I really want you to pay attention to the evidence I've provided you. And he offered to highlight which key pieces of evidence they really need to look at. So I think that was for me. What about for you?
Yeah, well, I think that Jenna definitely went line by line and walked us through the past 3 weeks, starting with the storyline of what she believes happened, or the state state believes happened, and then really kind of going right into making it easy for the jury members to digest. We have presented you with a plethora of evidence, and she starts with the digital history of Christine using fetish sites, talking to other men. There was no digital history of that. There was no evidence of that. Makes that clear. Then goes into, Brendan saying that there were affairs and there was rough sex, but again, zero evidence of that. The FetLife telegram messages, only occurred when Juliana and Brendan were in the home. The 2 weekends that Juliana and Brendan were out of the home, there was zero activity on these FetLife websites, right? Or the Messenger. So really kind of honing in on specific things. so that the jury members can sort of reflect back, that's right, and have a clear idea of what the state is saying.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because she had so many valid points about the messaging and when things were happening, but then we did hear John Carroll get up there. I don't know if you caught it. It was in the middle. He had been going on for quite a while, but there was a moment where he said one of the conversations on FetLife, it shows, you know, based on their forensic evidence, which again connects devices, it doesn't tell you who's in control of the device at that moment. He's just saying it was Christine's device or it was Juliana's device. And he said one of the devices owned by one of them was being used in the Banfield home while Brendan Banfield was at training. You know, he was at, I think Flexus is the name of the training he was at. So he was saying if Brendan was the planner, the one who came up with this elaborate plan, then how was he at FBI training down in Flexus when these conversations were happening? So, you know, he is still poking little holes in the theory and just, again, bringing up questions for the jurors to walk away with and be like, wait, does that make sense? Does that all line up?
Does that make sense? I think that is what Jenna was sort of getting at, is anyone with common sense, if you hear this story that Brendan has shared, like, I need you to really think about it. Who does this? Who does that? You know, and I really think that she was trying to just kind of get into their minds with that. The 911 question that she asked yesterday, why did you not call 911 at any point until after you shot Joseph Ryan?
Yeah.
That was when the 911 call was made.
And you know, he had an answer for everything, right? And he said his answer was that he thought it was just another one of the affairs. He didn't think police needed to be involved. And, you know, I think that's what we saw from him, right? Like, I'm curious to see when Frank comes back what he thinks of Brendan. Again, he did tell me the first day he thought Brendan on day 1 would get a C- in his opinion. Day 2, he said he did a little bit better. He was quick at answering the questions we heard from Jenna Sands. I don't know, for those of you who weren't with us this morning, we can play you some highlights of day 2 of testimony for Brendan Banfield. We did hear him testify both day 1 and day 2, but if we're able to, can we play you some clips from day 2 of testimony for Brendan?
I heard the sounds of, I would say, moaning, as well as sound of skin-on-skin contact.
What did you think was going on at that point?
Sex.
Why didn't you call 911 at that point?
Well, I believe that it was an affair. I thought about just ignoring the situation and going to work. The sound, I guess, sounded like it changed to me. Instead of what I thought was the sounds of sex, I thought that the impact sounds sounded forceful, and that Christine's moaning sounded painful and not pleasurable.
Walked up the stairs with the gun out. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And when you turned and saw Juliana had followed you, at that point in time, you're worried that bad things are happening, correct?
Yes, I am.
Did you tell her to call 911 at that point?
No, I was moving quickly towards the door.
Did you tell her to go back downstairs and get your daughter out of the house at that point?
I wasn't worried about Juliana at that point. I was worried about Christine.
Okay, and you weren't worried about your daughter at that point either then, right?
I don't think it was on the top of my mind when I believed that Christine is being injured, and that was at the forefront of my mind. I don't know why she chose to come to the house.
Okay, but you're law enforcement, and this is your house. You're not going to tell them what to do to ensure that they are safe when you have this doubt about what's going on?
I understand that, and it may have been a mistake that I didn't send them back out, and it's something that I've thought about many times. Christine was, I would describe as nude and on all fours, and Joe Ryan was behind her. He was clothed. He was looking directly at me. I had never seen Joseph Ryan before.
Have you ever had any communications with him before?
On February 24th is the only time I had communications with him in that room. I did not did not want to shoot him. He did a very forceful stab towards Christine. Christine told me that she was bleeding out and that she was sorry and that she loved me. He was stabbing her. I mean, I wish I shot him earlier.
Now that you've heard all of the evidence, every possible hearing that could happen in this case has happened. Now you are ready to tell us what happened. Is that accurate?
I was ready to tell what happened at Juliana's testimony, at Juliana's trial when that was scheduled for November.
These very strong feelings, these let's be together for the rest of our lives feelings did not exist when your wife was alive.
Correct. Juliana and I weren't even together when.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it looks like court may be starting shortly. It does look like the judge is getting some paperwork together. I'm not quite sure. Has it been 15 minutes? It feels like that went very quickly, right, Annie?
It did go by quickly, but once the cameras are on the judge, that's when we're going to take you live into the courtroom. We'll take you back live into the Brendan Banfield murder trial out of Fairfax County.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Carroll, you can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, we left off in the discussion of the bloodstain pattern analysis. And what was an interesting moment in terms of the experts was when there was talk of bloodstain inside the zipper and around that area. But if you look at the DLI report, which is number 169, you'll see in that report they were looking actually for touch DNA. They weren't actually looking for blood staining. They identified blood staining, but the whole point of it was to find Brendan Banfield's touch DNA on the inside of Joe's pants based upon some theory that he was either pulling the pants off or moving them or something like that. And that was one of the reasons why they went to a private lab to try to do that. And it didn't pan out. And you'll see the report. Now, in terms of the evidence on the bloodstain pattern analysis, let me just do a rundown. With regard to the knife, it was identified as being bloodstained. Leanne Singley said that. She negated the possibility of anything being wiped off, which might be one of the things that you might find in a situation of the nature of the government's theory, but she's negated that. That it contained DNA of Christine and Ryan, and Brendan was excluded. That Joe Ryan's DNA at the base of the blade, handle juncture, that was the testimony of Leanne Singley and also confirmed by the Division of Forensic Science. That Ryan had a puncture to the left thumb, that was Leanne Singley's testimony, as well as the medical examiner, Dr. Kessler, confirmed that. It was consistent with the knife, Dr. Kessler said, and it was consistent with the self-wounding that happens in situations involving stabbings. And you heard Leanne Singley touch on that. She was able to kind of give you a more circumspect view of what self-wounding was. I think Ms. Groff talked about slicing, fingers or it sliding or something like that. What we were looking for, and what I think Leanne Singley was able to tell you, is that there are a wide variety of injuries that occur, but oftentimes the stabber is someone that's injured. And I think there were significant statistics that she talked about, which I won't try. You'll have to rely on your recollections regarding that. You saw on the body cam footage, as well as through Ms. Singley's testimony, that Brendan does not have any injuries on his hands. And Ms. Dolly's testimony indicates Ryan's right hand closed when blood was deposited on it. That's consistent with Ryan holding the knife when stabbing, causing blood stains. Joe Ryan, there's a lot to be said, and I think you've already seen pictures of it in this closing, of the 4 stains on Ryan's forearm. What hasn't been said is that they were not tested. Leanne Singley says they're not able to be classified. Ms. Groff disagrees, saying that they are drip stains. She needs to say they're drip stains, which Leanne Singley says you can't say because you don't know the position of the arm, you don't know where it was at the time the blood came out. It could have been something from a significant bleeder as he's standing up. It could have been from numerous other possibilities. But Ms. Groff classifies something that Ms. Singley says you can't classify without certain factors, suggesting that it's falling from above and has Ryan on the floor. One might think you'd find the source of whatever that blood is if you're to have tested the blood that's in question. That might give you a little more guidance. And I think that's one of the reasons Leanne Singley was unable to identify that. If it was from Joe, then she'd probably have some explanation for that as an expert. If it was from anyone else, that perhaps could be a different explanation. But now all we deal with are possibilities. And that seems to be the crux of how the Commonwealth is pursuing this case. They're not putting on any evidence in terms of their own investigators. They're not providing any concrete evidence as to what happened that day. And interestingly enough, the shift in the last closing argument was that I hadn't been doing that. And the defense hadn't been doing that. But I think we can all agree that we've called significantly greater number of police witnesses because we had to. Because we want the truth out here. I called my client, though he has the absolute right not to come up and testify. And he testified. And the relationship issues with Juliana Perez Magalhães are touchy, and they're an awful story. But he sat there and he answered the questions. He was cross-examined. He answered those questions. We're bringing you the truth. We're trying in every way to get the truth. And many of the Fairfax County detectives have provided that, and that goes to their integrity. The genes, the touch DNA from the waistband zipper indicate Joe Ryan and Christine Banfield are the contributors. Brendan Banfield is excluded. All samples collected and tested on Ryan were from Joe Ryan or Christine. Brendan not identified as a contributor in any of them. Nothing in the materials reviewed gave any indication that Ryan was not the stabber. That was Leanne Singley's testimony. Brendan's jacket, blood on the rear of the right sleeve, DNA on exterior of right sleeve, mix of Ryan and Christine. Brendan indicates that Ryan grabbed his arm on Officer Beckner's video, Officer Baumler's video, in the ambulance, and also in the hospital. Brendan's jeans, the small stains on the thigh is consistent with cast off from the hands. That's Miss Dolly, Miss Groff. Brendan sat in the bathroom, if you look on the video, and the first responders arrived. He was basically told to sit on the tub, and you see him when you look at that video, and he's sitting there, and he's just, hands down, not sure where his hands go, and he was watching as his wife was being tended to. The stains on Brendan's jeans are consistent with him kneeling at Christine giving aid. That's what the body cam video shows. Back to the digital forensics for a moment. February 19th was a critical day because that was the beginning of the Telegram account. Juliana says she watched Brendan. They stole the laptop and the phone. They deleted the two-factor authentication code, but the two-factor authentication code remains on the phone to this day. And this is Defense Exhibit 156. Is it possible that Brendan and Juliana did this without Christine knowing that a Telegram account was opened in her name? It's not, based upon this exhibit. Because if you look at it, and you can look at the message from Telegram, shows up right underneath a message from Brad of Inova PICU, and right above a message from Nicole at Inova PICU. It was done early in the morning. If it had been done by someone other than herself, as soon as she looks at that message from Nicole, she'd realize something's going on. I should check this out. Inconsistent with catfishing and consistent with someone pursuing a fantasy. February 23rd, we saw digital forensics evidence from the evening of February 23rd. We saw use of Christine's laptop for 90 minutes for resort searches, with a couple of minutes of Telegram use interspersed. The Commonwealth in cross-examination opined, well, wouldn't it be possible that even if you were sitting in the same room, that she could have gone away to go to the bathroom for 2 minutes? And I guess, in this world, anything's possible. Is it probable, however? And that's really the more germane point to this. The Commonwealth's, I guess, concern in cross-examination was confirmed, at least in terms of the room, when Brendan testified. And if you recall his discussion, we were talking about, we were already going on a cruise, and we were talking about going to the Dominican Republic. We saw the calendar that showed the place, Royalton Resorts. We showed the searches that showed kid-friendly vacations. So we knew who was behind the keyboard, and Brendan knew who was behind the keyboard because he was there with Christine. And they were collaborating on the vacation research. Brendan was playing with Valerie, and Christine was on the couch with her laptop and her phone. That's the testimony. The device's symmetry and connectivity you heard about has the context to complete the entire picture. Juliana was not in the room, and this is supported by the analysis on her phone, showing a steady stream of messaging, social media use, and Netflix at the same time that Telegram, FetLife, and the suspect Gmail account were being used by Christine. And finally, February 24th, Juliana was not awake and not out of bed based on her devices at the time she claimed to be watching Brendan Banfield sending messages in the kitchen. You heard Mr. Litsky talk about her Apple Watch. You heard him talk about her phone. We're showing when steps were showing, which would be an indication of someone moving. She had not moved for some time after the laptop was accessed. What we know from the testimony yesterday was that Christine Banfield had the laptop and the phone in her bedroom and was awake when he went up to retrieve Valerie. That is an artifact in the world of digital forensic analysis. And you'll see this entire exchange, Defense Exhibit 348, 349, 350. You'll see Juliana Perez Magalhaes' first steps at 626, Defense Exhibit 351, 352, and 353. Juliana Perez starts her day after the telegram message is already sent, in conflict with what she's told, in conflict with the story that she's adopted on behalf of the Commonwealth. Brendan's at McDonald's. Exhibit 354, 355, 356. Those are time-stamped screenshots from the McDonald's videos. Juliana is on the phone telling us her phone tells us that her activity stops at 7:24 under Defense Exhibit 357. At the exact same time, her watch steps are stopping at 7:24. Defense Exhibit number 358. Defense Exhibit 359, Juliana steps resuming on the phone at 7:41. Exhibit 360, Juliana, car is parked at 7:41. Exhibit 361, Juliana's watch resuming steps at 7:42. We know that Brendan was out of the house. We know that Juliana was in her car. And if you look at Exhibit 362, there's someone who's logging into Christine's laptop at 7:33. There are no other humans in the house. And Juliana and Brendan were not there. In conflict with the government's theory, Christine logs into her laptop and places her devices in a drawer. She puts the devices away. She gets Lily down into the basement, brings her food to the basement, and gates her in. And she meets Joe Ryan. And they walk up to the master bedroom. Why? Why would Joe Ryan stab Christine? If you take away the consensual part of this, if he were found in a bedroom of someone by someone who's a police officer, he'd be looking at a life sentence. In this instance, he was confronted by an armed law enforcement officer saying police. That officer was standing in the only way to get out of that room, other than jumping through the window and falling down 3 flights. He had a gun trained on him, and he was telling him and was told that he was going to be arrested. He had marijuana in his system, and he was angry. Who was he angry at? Could he have been angry at Christine, thinking that she set him up? Could he have been angry at his situation for deciding to go into a house that he didn't know and put himself in this situation? Could he be angry at my client, who was there to try to figure out what was going on and ultimately try to protect his wife? Those are the whys. And if we'd had any investigators that were actually involved in the case coming to the stand, those would be questions that I would want to know, and there would be questions that you would want to know. Because you have a decision before you, and that decision requires a review of all of the evidence. Now, is it reasonable after a 6 to 8 week affair that someone's going to try to get rid of their companion of 19 years, wife of 12 years? Is that reasonable? You heard from my client, he thinks it's absurd. In pursuing this case, the Commonwealth has presented absolutely no forensics evidence that supports that Brendan Banfield had anything to do with this, yet the story continues. This isn't how justice works, and you can't just come up with a theory and make it fit. They're trying to sell you a story without any facts. And we have the facts, and those facts are in evidence. Those jury instructions, when you see them, you'll realize they're very clear. If you have doubts about the investigation, if you have doubts about how they've conducted this investigation, if you believe that there's something that's been held back in this investigation, that's reasonable doubt. That's reasonable doubt before you even get into the things that negate the possibilities of their case. And these are hard decisions. There's a lot on the line. But know this, if they fell short in what you expect should be the investigation, if they fell short, that's not on you. The jury instructions say you must acquit. And it's not on you. I don't have another opportunity to talk to you. It's their burden to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, so they get the opportunity to speak. So I apologize if I've gone too long, but I wanted to make sure that these important issues came before you. And I leave you with these words. When they lie and manipulate to get someone to make a statement, that's not discovering the truth. That's planting the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your patience. And at the end of your deliberations, I ask that you find my client not guilty of all charges. Thank you.